Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, October the 15th, 2025. Gaza is in the news and Donald Trump went to Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt and he signed a peace agreement, and it was all part of a big summit, with sort of world leaders. And, that event potentially is important. It does suggest that maybe there really is peace in Gaza. And in this video, I want to look at the astrology of the last couple of days. We had an agreement, I think, on Thursday, where there was an agreement to release the hostages. Then on Monday there was this meeting in Egypt, and there were things going on that I think that we really need to look at. But before I talk about Gaza and Israel and Palestine and Hamas, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Wednesday, October the 15th, 2025. So here is the chart for today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So this is set for noon on October the 15th, which is a Wednesday, and the moon is at 16 Leo. So the moon is right in the middle of this sign, in the middle of a fixed sign. So you could say that there is a desire for stability. And, we want things to be straightforward, and we don't necessarily want, too many surprises. Now, the moon is making two square aspects. Moon in Leo is making a square to Mercury. It's also making a square to Mars. So you could say that the moon is on the Mercury-Mars midpoint. And as far as, what these aspects mean, it can be about people digging in, perhaps not wanting to move, not wanting to change. And this may be reflected in what they say, also might be reflected in, what, we say. Mercury and Mars in Scorpio, they don't really like to compromise, and they're quite prepared to defend their position, at least on a verbal level. Now, as far as other things going on, it's a day where there isn't much action, aside from those, two squares. We still have Venus opposition Neptune, so that aspect is still, very much with us. And so you could say that Venus opposition Neptune, there might be, in some quarters, a sense of sort of make-believe. There is a degree of fantasy with Venus opposition Neptune, and as far as dealing with other people, we might get the wrong impression, and perhaps we shouldn't rush to judgment when evaluating anyone. We can evaluate them in a way that is too positive. We think someone can be trusted. But additionally, we can be overly negative. And so with Venus opposition Neptune, we should, as far as possible, be, down to earth. Though Venus, is in Libra. I know Venus has been in Libra for a day or two, but, just a reminder that, Venus is in its own sign. And furthermore, Venus is in mutual reception with Saturn, because Venus and Saturn are in each other's exaltation. So Venus is in Libra, Saturn is exalted in Libra. Saturn is in Pisces, Venus is exalted in Pisces. So Venus and Saturn are naturally strengthened by this mutual reception. And, this mutual reception will continue for as long as Venus stays in Libra. And early next month, I think it's early next month, Venus will move out of Libra into Scorpio. So, that is a note for the future. And, why am I telling you this? Well, just to remind you to make the most of this mutual reception, particularly, if Venus is a planet that's important to you, for example, if you're a Taurus or a Libran, or maybe from Saturn's perspective, if you're a Capricorn or an Aquarius. So as far as the overall day is concerned, I'm not particularly convinced that it's going to be that momentous, because there's just not a lot going on. And as far as Australia and New Zealand are concerned, let's just set the chart for Sydney. So here is the chart set for Sydney, and the moon is at 7 degrees Leo at noon. And so that tells us wherever we are, the moon is definitely going to be in Leo. So what's the moon doing in Leo? It's not doing a great deal. I mean, it's still making a square to Mercury and Mars, like in the Americas. So I mean, I don't think there's a huge difference in the experience of those of you in Australia or New Zealand and those of you in, for example, California. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So here is the chart. Still, that T-square is around. Mars opposition Uranus, with Venus on the T, and we could say that Mars is kind of sesquiquadrate the Venus-Uranus midpoint. So that might indicate a bit of excitement, things happening that we weren't necessarily expecting. But it can also be about irritation. Some people are a law unto themselves. And additionally, we've got Mars moving towards a sextile of Pluto over the next couple of days. So with Mars sextile Pluto, this could be a time where many of us feel we want to have an influence. We want to make things happen. And if we do feel like that, we've got to be subtle about it. It's not just that Mars is making a sextile to Pluto, it's also making a trine to Neptune. So, Mars, which has just gone into heliocentric Sagittarius, is trine Neptune, which is in Aries, both geocentrically and heliocentrically. So, Mars trine Neptune is saying perhaps that, if we want to have an impact, we just can't be, completely direct and to the point. We do have to perhaps adopt a rather, roundabout approach. So, that is, the overall picture. I think you get the message that maybe not a great deal is happening today. And that's the thing about this week. All of the activity was really packed into Monday and Tuesday. And for the rest of the week, well, it's just, not quite so interesting. And, maybe this means that when we don't have so many astrological aspects, that perhaps we've got more freedom. We're not so constrained. Although we shouldn't forget that the moon is making squares to Mercury and Mars geocentrically. So there may be moments where some of us get angry, but I don't think these moments are going to last long, and we shouldn't be more impatient than we have to be. So anyway, let me now talk about the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, October the 15th, 2025. Aries. Mercury and Mars are quite close together. You can see that Mercury is in Scorpio, 12, 13 Scorpio. Mars is at 16 Scorpio. So Mercury and Mars are starting to form a conjunction. And because of this conjunction, the growing influence of this conjunction, there may be moments when you feel that ideally something needs to be said, but can you get it together? I mean, you can always say something, you can always do something, you can always get attention, but just because you would like to say something doesn't necessarily mean that you have to. And there may be something about the way you talk that is just a bit clumsy, just a bit too hasty, and you might say the wrong thing at the wrong time, and there's a possibility that you just don't leave things for long enough. And maybe it's a situation, Aries, where you need to just allow things to develop rather than just sort of jump in and hope for the best. And the moon is making a square to Mercury and Mars, and this square between Mercury and Mars could stir things up, and there might be a point of conflict that just sort of comes out of nowhere. You want to do something and you perceive a block. As far as you're concerned, there might be someone in your way and you want to respond. But is it strictly speaking necessary to respond? I mean, it's certainly true, Aries, that you're able to bring to bear a considerable amount of power if need be, but you don't want to be more powerful than is necessary. And sometimes it's best just to say nothing. You know that you can have an influence if you want to. You can get people to sit up and listen. But is there really any need to push your point? Especially now that Venus is moving into Libra. Venus is very much in Libra right now. Venus is at what, sort of 2 degrees of the sign, and so with Venus in Libra, you should perhaps give other people a chance. Give them a chance to develop. Venus is well placed in Libra, not just because it's in its own sign, but because it's in mutual reception to Saturn by exaltation. And so if you are thinking of being critical or showing your displeasure with another person, well, try to work out what's going on. And maybe, Aries, someone is in a stronger position than they seem to be, and so you shouldn't assume, for example, if you have a conflict with someone, that you're necessarily going to be the winner, because the other person might have some strengths that you hadn't fully allowed for. Taurus, you are still perhaps getting used to Venus being in Libra. I mean, Venus is your sign, and it might have been a bit of a shock to the system, Venus moving out of Virgo into Libra. And, to begin with, it might have seemed, rather tedious. You perhaps had to slow down. You had to maybe, take into consideration what other people were doing. And, also you maybe realized that you just couldn't leave things to chance, that if you wanted something to happen, you would have to, put in the necessary preparation. But, that's okay. You can do it. And, Venus is in mutual reception by exaltation to Saturn. And so that means, Taurus, that, if you make the effort, you can be, very organized. You really can, get yourself together. And that if you just take things, one step at a time, you can, make very good progress. And it's just always important with Venus and Libra, not going too far in, one direction or the other. Be quite moderate about it, sticking to the middle path. And, if you can do that, you'll keep everyone happy. And most importantly, you'll be keeping yourself happy. And also, you'll be giving yourself a sense of calm. And I think that that's really what you should be aiming for. You just don't need stress for the sake of it. And when, dealing with people, it's probably not a time for getting too close to, any one person. There is a feeling of general reserve. I think you feel reserved. You enjoy people's company to some extent, but you don't want to go all the way, and you don't want to reveal too much, and perhaps you're afraid of the consequences, or maybe you just don't want to waste time. If you reveal too much, you talk too much, then you get involved with someone else, and that takes time, and you have to, adjust to the situation, and before you know it, the day's over. And the reality is, Taurus, that right now, there are things that you should be doing, and so perhaps you should sort of get on with them. And if you can do that, and if you can show some self-discipline, then I think that today can be very satisfactory. Gemini, the moon is moving through Leo, still moving through Leo, and so with the moon moving through Leo, you probably have quite a lot to say for yourself. I mean, Geminis usually have a lot to say for themselves, but maybe you'll have more to say than usual. And at the same time, there could be a certain pride to what you are saying. You might really believe that you've got it right, that you've got the answers. And it's great that you're feeling so confident, but maybe you haven't got all the answers. Maybe you've got some of the answers, even most of the answers, but certainly not all of the answers. And so a bit of humility goes a long way, especially as the moon is making square aspects to both Mercury and Mars. Now, moon square Mercury, Mercury is your ruler, and moon square Mercury is very much how you communicate, how you communicate both on a mental and emotional level. And you don't want to come over as being too into your own ideas, too certain that you've got all the answers. And perhaps you should be ready for getting some feedback. It is good to get feedback. I always appreciate feedback in the comments to this channel. Not every comment I read is positive, and sometimes people are I think, being pointlessly negative. But sometimes people make legitimate criticisms of this channel and how I'm presenting myself and my choice of words. And so, I'm a Gemini, and I should myself be ready to take criticism, in the same way that you should, provided of course that criticism is well meant. And just recognize that you really you haven't got all the answers, and just provided you know that, you'll be fine. At the same time, Gemini, I think that you're going to value your freedom. You will want to do things your way, and at the same time you'll be on the lookout for things that are exciting and are uplifting. And you can be uplifted by your own ideas. You can also be uplifted by other people and their contribution. And it's possible, Gemini, that there's something that has been holding you back, and that there's now a way to deal with it, and you start to see some answers. And that's what you're looking for, because what you absolutely don't want to do is to get stuck. I mean, that would be unnecessary. And if you don't want to be stuck, you've got to have an open mind. You've got to be looking for solutions in many different areas. Cancer, don't forget the financial side of things. I mean, it's something that is tedious, but it might just crop up when you least expect it. And you've got the moon moving through Leo, and Leo of course being the sign following Cancer, and the moon in Leo is making a square to both Mercury and Mars. And those squares between Mercury and Mars, I think they could have a financial side to them. They could also be irritating. Something bothers you. You maybe don't like what you're hearing. You don't like what people are saying. Maybe people have just got it wrong as far as you're concerned. And if you think that someone's got it wrong, then you should tell them. But you need to do your research. You have to be really sure that someone has got it wrong before raising your voice, because otherwise you could just get yourself into a situation which might be embarrassing. You might even make a fool of yourself with Moon square Mercury, Moon square Mars. Saying something, being angry, being self-righteous in a way that just is not right, and you might just come over as just not being very reasonable, and that's something that you really shouldn't want to happen, and I think it would be unnecessary. But on a positive note, if you are sure of your ground, and if you really have done your research, then I think you're going to be very good at arguing your case, and you're going to be particularly good at arguing your case if money is involved. So if you think that you've got it right with money, you think you've done your research, you've really looked over the details, and your calculations add up, then you're probably entitled to push your point and to really double down. And usually Cancerians, once they have decided that they are in the right, then they are in the right, even if they're in the wrong. And that is a thing about Cancerians. They're quite good at getting their way. And if you are involved in some kind of dispute and you hold your ground, even if you have misunderstood things, even if your command of the facts is imperfect, you can still reach a situation where you are accepted, where people take your word for it. But is that desirable? Just because you win an argument doesn't necessarily mean that you should be pleased with yourself. Sometimes you can win an argument for the wrong reasons. Your arguments might be good, but fundamentally you might be wrong, and that's not a good position to be in. I mean, short term it's a good position to be in because it makes you feel good, but longer term it's creating a bad situation, and if you think you got away with something, then you might give it another go, and then in the end result may not be too fortunate. But I'm sure that you have sufficient self-awareness not to get yourself into this kind of situation. Leo, today could be a bit tricky. Things may not be entirely straightforward, and although you're going to try your hardest to be down to earth and you're going to want to keep things simple as far as you can, it just may be hard work, and you might find that things that are supposed to be really very straightforward aren't actually straightforward at all. And maybe there are things that you completely trust, you completely rely on them, they haven't let you down in the past, but things might be different, and people and situations might behave in a way that you're just not prepared for. But it needn't be too much of a problem. I mean, the key point is to have flexibility and toleration, and to understand that everybody has their own story, everyone has their own reasons, and if someone behaves in a way that seems weird, somewhere along the line there is a an explanation. But maybe, Leo, you're not going to be in the mood for explanations. But perhaps I think you should be in the mood. And one aspect we've got, or rather two aspects we've got, is we've got the Moon in Leo making squares to Mercury and Mars, and these two squares could, in certain cases, make you quite irritated. There are things that could annoy you, perhaps things going on in your home, or it could be members of your family, or it just could be your plain defensiveness. You don't want things getting in your way, and you don't want to have your equilibrium upset. And if someone goes beyond a certain point, then you might be quick to show your irritation. At the same time, Leo, your attempts to assert yourself and to make your position clear may not be 100% successful. Perhaps you're going to be confused. You may not be sure what is needed, what is required of you. Or another possibility, there's a chance that you might give false signals. Now, that is not something that you're planning on doing. As far as you're concerned, I think you're going to be very straightforward and you're going to make an effort to be clear. But even when you do make such an effort, it still might be the case that things are complicated, and your actions, perhaps at an unconscious level, are just making them even more complicated. So perhaps, Leo, you need to be as straightforward as you possibly can be, and just consider the possibility when you explain something that your explanations may be making muddy water even muddier. So try to look at things from other people's perspective. That is especially important now that Pluto's in Aquarius. Pluto's just gone stationary direct, and that means that handling other people in the right way could be important. Perhaps with Pluto going stationary direct, someone who had the potential to be influential, but wasn't really using that potential, has suddenly switched on, and suddenly they are becoming a force to be reckoned with. Not necessarily in a bad way, but it's just important that you understand and respect everyone around you, and it's a bad idea to underestimate anyone. Perhaps you'll underestimate them on the basis of past performance, but the past is the past, and in the future, things can change. Virgo. At the moment, Virgo, you might be of a view that you don't really want to do much. Things can be, quite exhausting. Perhaps things have been exhausting. There's been a lot to take on board, a lot to understand. Perhaps you're still getting used to Venus's aspect with Saturn. Okay, that Venus-Saturn aspect is separating, but it's still there to some extent. And perhaps you've become aware that social interactions can have their downside, and maybe now, Virgo, you're perhaps appreciating your own company. You don't necessarily have to be with anyone, and perhaps your best work is going to be done when you are on your own. On your own, you are in control. But the moon is making squares to Mercury and Mars, and those squares between Mercury and Mars could be about something making you annoyed. That moon square Mercury, from your perspective, Virgo, could be an aspect that relates to communication, how you talk, how other people talk, and how you relate to the person who is talking to you. And moon square Mercury could indicate a sort of a mismatch. You're trying to say something, you think you're being clear, but your message isn't being understood. And it may just be about passing incompatibility. I mean, you can't be incompatible with everyone, and compatibility does change. It's not a sort of either or thing. One day you might be very compatible with someone, the next day you might be completely incompatible with the same person. So it does depend. And issues of compatibility and incompatibility, may at the moment be very strong with that moon square Mercury, and the moon is also making a square to Mars. And with that moon square, well, both Mercury and Mars, you could do things and give signals that you really hadn't planned on. It just happens. You behave in a particular way. You don't know why you behave in a particular way, or perhaps you say things and it may not be entirely conscious, but at an unconscious level, you do know what you're doing. You are trying to create, a particular effect, and that effect could be quite massive. So, what really are you trying to do? I think that, many Virgos want to be free of things that have been holding you back. And, many things can hold you back. And, one thing that can hold you back is, other people. And perhaps you're aware of who has been holding you back. And, maybe it's just time to say, thank you and goodbye. Do consider it. You don't have to be friends with everyone forever. And perhaps there's a situation in your life which has just been, dragging on a bit, dragging on maybe for just far longer than it should have been, but you're getting bored of it now. And so if you want to bring something to an end, Virgo, then I think you can do it. And it's the kind of thing that if you do bring it to an end, you perhaps will be tempted to end your involvement. I mean, I don't say tempt. I mean, it might be the right thing to do. You end your involvement with something, and it seems a big break, but once you've made that break, you could just feel a great sense of relief. Libra, I hope you are enjoying Venus moving through your sign. It's now at around sort of 2 degrees Libra, and it does mean that you have great abilities as far as your social life is concerned. I mean, you've always got these abilities, but with Venus moving into your sign, I think these abilities are going to be stronger than usual. And just make sure that between now and early November, you do really make the most of it. And additionally, Libra, Venus is in mutual reception to Saturn by exaltation. I mean, I don't know if I said that yesterday, but I'm just making it clear that you've understood that. And with Venus being in mutual reception by exaltation with Saturn, that means that both Venus and Saturn are strengthened. So Venus is, extra strong. And so Libra, it's very important that you don't doubt yourself, and you take every opportunity to make yourself stronger. If there have been any weaknesses in your life, then maybe that you can now sort of address them. And in the process, Libra, you shouldn't feel that you have to rely on anyone. You don't. You can make your own decisions, and if a person or a situation has run their course, or you feel that they're no longer useful, then you can possibly create some distance. And it doesn't have to be a permanent change. You might want to create distance between yourself and another person temporarily, perhaps even just over the next few days, because everyone has their purpose, everyone has their role. And people's roles and purposes can change, and there may be people who could be very useful to you today, but there may be other people who are just not going to be useful at all. And I know that all sounds a bit transactional. who can benefit who, but I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that Libra, it is a time when it is worth considering your own interests. And what could trip you up is just being too close to another person, having too much loyalty to someone else. I mean, loyalty is a good thing, but loyalty can be exaggerated, and in the end, Libra, you have to make your own decisions, and you have to do what is right for you. Scorpio. Moon in Leo is probably quite a good thing. I mean, I know that the moon is in Leo every month, but this time around, Moon in Leo is making a squares to Mercury and Mars. And in the introduction to this video, I talked about these squares, and I indicated that these squares could be negative. They could stir things up. They might create disagreements. They could make it difficult to compromise. But from a Scorpio perspective, I don't think these two aspects are a problem. I think they could actually be an advantage. And you have to remember that Mars is moving through your sign, and Moon is in a part of your chart connected with your ambitions, everything you want to achieve. And so Moon square Mars could really motivate you. And if there is, Scorpio, something you want, then I would suggest that you give it everything you've got. You don't sort of shy away from your own ambitions, or you think that today, it's unnecessary to do much. You don't want to draw attention to yourself. Well, no, Scorpio. If something is important to you, and you feel that you really want it, then you should make the most of what's available today. And I think quite a lot is available today, and today you can bring to bear considerable power. And this power, it could be like the power of the cosmos. It's something very natural but raw, and if you can harness this power, then Scorpio, it may be the case that there really is a huge amount that you can achieve, and in the process you can almost turn things upside down. You don't have to be happy with the status quo, and if you want to create big changes, I think that is very much something that you can do. Sagittarius. There is some fire, like yesterday, with the moon in Leo. And so, with the moon in Leo, you don't have to be satisfied with the way things are. And there isn't just one way of doing things. There are several ways of doing things. And, you should choose the method that suits you the best, that you feel most comfortable with. And it's not a time to be following another person's rules, another person's system. You have a good idea about how you want to do things, and if you do things your way, then I think you're probably going to be pretty successful. And at the same time, Sagittarius, I think that right now you are able to have an impact. There's something about you that is difficult to ignore, and I think that people will just like the way you present yourself. You have something that just other people are missing. They almost want a part of you, and not literally. We're not talking about sort of relics or anything like that, but they want a part of your energy, because there isn't so much energy around, and it's in short supply. But you are a supplier of this energy, and so that does give you a certain amount of responsibility. You're there to get things moving, to stir things up, and to to get people's attention. And don't underestimate your ability to be charming and also to be attractive. And this does mean that relationships may take an interesting turn, and it's all because of you. It's all because of what you are presenting, and it may be that you just come over as just being an interesting proposition. And why would that be the case? It goes back to this question of excitement, and people are looking for excitement, and at the same time, they want a bit of security, and perhaps you can sort of offer the best of both worlds. You seem to be a safe pair of hands, someone who does provide security, but also, you can be, very interesting. So, a Sagittarius, a lot going on, potentially. I mean, at least in a relative sense. I talked about the astrology of today in general, and I said, well, astrologically, we've got, Moon in Leo, Moon square Mercury, Moon square Mars, and there isn't very much else going on. So the day for many of the 12 signs is maybe not going to be very interesting. But I think for you, Sagittarius, there definitely are things going on, and I think that you should, take advantage of it all, and don't underestimate your, ability to charm, because I think that people really will like whatever it is that you present. Capricorn. Still, Capricorn, you're able to project yourself very well, and part of that is the continuing influence of this grand trine in air signs, Venus in Libra, Uranus in Gemini, Pluto in Aquarius. It's still very much there, and this Venus in Libra, perhaps I didn't emphasize this enough, but the thing about Venus in Libra, it's not just that Venus is in its own sign. It's not just that Venus is in a very high-profile angle of your chart, but is connected with ambition and with status. It's also the fact that Venus is in mutual reception with Saturn, by exaltation, not by sign rulership, by exaltation. Venus in Libra, Saturn is exalted in Libra, Saturn in Pisces, Venus is exalted in Pisces. So that does really strengthen you, and it strengthens your ability to make things happen, and you can take yourself seriously, and the world will realize that you're taking yourself seriously, and they're not really going to want to mess with you. So, don't feel that you don't have enough power, that you can't make things happen, because, that is really, not true. You're someone who deep down has a clear sense of purpose. And, once you have, decided that you want something, you'll know how to get it, and you can get it to some extent through just being pleasant and being reasonable. And so, it's all about how you wrap your desires. Sometimes it's best not to be completely open about what you want, but instead, to be subtle and to come over as being warm and friendly, but always focused, always knowing what you're doing, always knowing what you're trying to achieve. And by doing that, I think that you really can establish yourself and show your power, and you can do it in a way that doesn't upset anyone, because I think that people will appreciate what you're doing, and if you need support, I think that you are very likely to get it. Aquarius. Don't forget, Aquarius, that Venus is in mutual reception to Saturn. I'm saying this because perhaps I didn't say it enough yesterday. And when I say Venus is in mutual reception to Saturn, what I'm saying is that Venus and Saturn are in each other's exaltation signs. And that does matter to you because Saturn is your ruler. So, with Venus, the lesser benefic in mutual reception with your ruler, that just puts you in a good position. It allows you to enjoy yourself, but also to be able to see the benefits of a situation. Something that is enjoyable can also be profitable. Indeed, if it's not enjoyable, can it be profitable? So enjoyment and fulfillment today, I think, are going to be pretty important. And at the same time, Aquarius, you don't have to just follow the crowd. You can very much be yourself. And your individuality right now is very strong. It's very clear, who you are and what you're about. And if you want to create effects, quite dramatic effects, maybe, I think that you very much can. And your willpower is going to be really, really strong at the moment. And so I don't really think that there is much to hold you back. And of course you're helped by that grand trine in air signs. We had it yesterday. It's still around. Venus in early Libra, trine Pluto in early Aquarius, trine Uranus in early Gemini. And it's all coming together, Aquarius. And if you have an idea about what you want to achieve, what you want to do, then that idea is not as unrealistic as it sounds. It may feel ungrounded, but sometimes the idea alone is enough. It's a start. The idea encourages you to do something, to take action, to get things moving, and sooner or later you have a chance to really ground your idea and make it into something that is completely real. It does exist in the world along with you, and it can be turned into just a fundamental part of who you are. Pisces, you are unlikely to be ignored today. There's something you can do, something you can offer that everyone finds very interesting. You're not someone who's going to be ignored. So don't doubt yourself, and take every opportunity to be noticed, and do think about the kind of impact you're having. You can have a powerful impact. You can make a lasting impression. And sometimes you might have to make a few adjustments. Being a Pisces, you're very sensitive to other people's feelings and other people's sensitivities. And because of that, you can adjust your style and your appearance, just enough so that you make the right impression. You are listened to, but people do pay attention to you. So just a few small adjustments, they can make a huge difference. And it just may be, maybe the way you present yourself, maybe the way you dress. It may just be something about your aura, something quite intangible. But being a Pisces, you know perhaps how to change your aura, to kind of change the energy that you're emanating. I mean, that is a complicated thing, and I mean, it's complicated if you're not a Pisces, but as a Pisces, I think that you know how to create the change, depending on who you're dealing with. So that does look pretty good, and you're generally, at the moment, you are very appealing. You just are someone who is just difficult to ignore. And that means that, for example, relationships should work pretty well today, and they can work on your terms. You don't have to do what other people say. You're not at all. And if you're honest about what you want, then I think that you will be taken at face value, and you can find people who are supportive and who want you to succeed. And if there's anything you want, then I think that there's every chance that you'll be able to get it. But in the process, Pisces, don't be sloppy. I think that does matter. I think it's important to have a disciplined approach. Even when you're dealing with things which are far-fetched, exciting, far-flung, even when you're dealing with that kind of stuff, there's still a place for discipline. Because if you don't show discipline and focus, then it's going to be very difficult to bring far-flung ideas down to earth, down into the material plane, and perhaps to be able to sort of use them in a way that is practical. And don't forget practicality. It can be difficult to forget about it can be difficult to be practical at the moment because we don't have any planets in Earth signs, and so you might notice some impracticality. And it's not necessarily your impracticality, but sometimes there's just nothing to hold on to, and so Pisces, you have to perhaps make a special effort. But you do know what matters, and Saturn is moving through your sign, and Saturn is in mutual reception to Venus, and I think that does give you enough grounding, and you can just take things that might be strange, might almost be alien, and you can really make sense of them, and turn them into something that can be useful, not just for you, but also for everyone else. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And so it's now time to look at things from a perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 26, which is the taming power of the great. Now, this hexagram does not have any moving lines, and so that might mean that today could be quite uneventful. And I've already suggested that astrologically there isn't much going on. I mean, I pointed out that the moon is square Mercury, the moon is square Mars, and those are the two exact aspects today, so it's not really that busy, and so with no moving lines, we shouldn't necessarily expect things to see any completion. It might very much be work in progress. We get a general idea, but are we really able to see it through? Now, this hexagram 26 for taming power of the great is not really telling us to do anything especially dramatic. It's telling us that we need to be aware of our past, the taming power of the great. So there is a question about how you actually see this in a grammatical way. Now, the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching uses this title for hexagram 26, the taming power of the great, and how do you parse this title? And I mean, really, you'd have to have some familiarity with Chinese, to the Chinese language, and classical Chinese, to really get to grips with it. And trying to parse it using the English language seems to be just a waste of time, a fool's errand. But because you can see the contradiction here. or not the contradiction, but the two way of moving it, the taming power of the great. Does that mean that the great needs to be tamed? Or is it saying that the taming power of the great, that the great has a taming power that can have an influence on us? And, maybe it's a bit of both. And when you think about the taming power of the great, how is the great trying to tame us? We should be thinking about the past, everything that we have come from, what we've been told over the course of our life, and perhaps that relates to sort of wisdom. There's some sort of basic wisdom that doesn't change, from year to year, decade to decade to decade. The basic wisdom remains the same. And so with the taming power of the great, we think of what, perhaps what the I Ching tells us, that we need to be familiar with sayings of antiquity. So what that might mean is, being familiar with, what we were told as a child, or at some earlier stage in our life. We are given this wisdom, and that wisdom should tame us. And, we don't necessarily have to just think for ourselves all the time, make our own decisions on the spot. We still have a sense of tradition and morality, and perhaps we can become part of that. And that might, to an extent, control who we are. So, this control, it shouldn't be regarded as, anything bad. It runs in our best interest. We can't be just ill-disciplined and just do whatever we like. I mean, that is a recipe for chaos, and, we all have our own direction. And part of, finding our direction is to tell us what we're not. Because if we want to know who we are, if we want to know who we are, then we have to know who we are not. And so the taming power of the great does indicate that, we need to focus, on the past, and perhaps also everything that, may be supporting us. And so, restraint is probably something that is worth trying to keep. And when we look at this hexagram, when we look at the nuclear hexagram, the hexagram in the middle of this hexagram, then the nuclear hexagram is a hexagram number 54, which is the marrying maiden. And so it's not that the marrying maiden is a problem. It's just the marrying maiden perhaps tells us something about why the great needs to be tamed. So the marrying maiden, represents a woman who is in a hurry to get married. She's in a hurry to get a commitment. She's in a hurry for action. Whatever that action might be, and it needn't be about relationships. And so perhaps that says something about us and the taming power of the great. We want action. We want to become part of something. We're in a hurry. But it's a hurry that is not right. There's something rather indecent about it. And we need to hold on to what we've got and just not be in a rush to move to the next stage. That is not going to be desirable. So as far as movement is concerned, well, we're not going to have much movement today because this hexagram is locked. And we just need to perhaps think about the past, think about the wisdom from the past, and allow it to guide us through. So now I want to look at Gaza. I mean, I must say that with Gaza, if you've been watching these videos, you'll know that I don't really talk about Gaza too much. And I mean, it's a terrible thing to confess to, but to be honest, at some level, I don't find Gaza very interesting. I mean, I know I should find Gaza interesting. I should be fascinated by it, but I'm not. But you can't avoid it. And so let's look at some of the relevant charts. So, as far as, what's been going on, I mean, Trump has been very keen to sort out the Gaza issue. And he's perhaps been using his connections in the Middle East. I mean, he gets on relatively well with Benjamin Netanyahu. He gets on well with many of the leaders in Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. So there's a lot he can leverage, and he wants peace. That's what he says. I mean, he wants peace in Ukraine. He wants peace in Ukraine so much that he's saying he's thinking about supplying Zelensky with cruise missiles. I'm not quite sure how that's going to work out. So yeah, he's annoyed that he hasn't been able to get peace in Ukraine, but Gaza is perhaps more straightforward. And so where do we start? I mean, there have been certain agreements. There was an agreement on Thursday, which related to hostages. So that was perhaps the precursor to it. And now the hostages that are left alive, have been released. I think there are 20 hostages have been released. So that was on the Thursday. So as far as when that was, I think that was on October the 9th. And so October the 9th was a Thursday, wasn't it? So that's kind of first contact. Then of course we just had another agreement on Monday. So as far as the hostages are concerned, what's going on there? I mean, it's perhaps not great, this chart for Thursday, because Venus is making an opposition to Saturn. I mean, if you're thinking about peace, do you really want Venus to be opposition Saturn? I mean, Venus, is the planet of peace, and if it's opposition Saturn, it could all be, a big strain. And then to mitigate it, the moon's in Taurus, and it's probably appropriate that the moon is in Taurus, because Taurus is a sign that has a relationship to Israel. I mean, Israel became an independent state when the sun was in Taurus, and I think traditionally there is something Taurean about the Jewish state. Isn't it sort of haaretz, the earth? Isn't that what it's all about? And the earth, Taurus. I mean that is very fitting. The promised land. And so Moon in Taurus, trine Venus, that perhaps does create an opportunity to find peace. So, yeah, Venus opposition Saturn isn't great, but then you've got Moon trine Venus, so that kind of helps. And then on Monday, well, you had Trump flying into Sharm el Sheikh and signing this piece of paper, and you had all these sort of world leaders behind him. So it was a big moment for him. It was a big moment for his prestige. And here is a chart for the peak of that summit meeting. And I think what happened is he signed this piece of paper, and then he just left. Job done, as perhaps as far as he was concerned. So here's a chart. It does say Cairo. Now the reason it says Cairo is because Sharm el Sheikh was not in the atlas for my astrology program. So I put in Cairo, to get the time zone. And then having put in Cairo, I changed the coordinates to Sharm el Sheikh. So, although it just looks as if it's set for the wrong place, I did sort of work that out. And it's 7:25 that she signed it. That took me a long time to work out, but there were YouTube videos which had timestamps when it was all going on. So I'm pretty sure this is the time when he signed it. I mean, I may be wrong, but that's I think as good as he gets. Maybe it was slightly before 7:25, maybe 15 seconds earlier. So what's kind of interesting about this chart is Venus. Venus is certainly on the Aries point. I mean, Venus is very, very close to 0 degrees Libra, which is opposition 0 degrees Aries. So Venus on the Aries point, well, the Aries point is the world point. So Venus at 0 degrees Aries, the peace treaty, is, that's just very obvious. Finding peace, that's great. But what slightly bothered me about this is, why didn't he wait? Venus, 2948 Virgo. Couldn't he have somehow waited for Venus to go into Libra? Well, apparently not. And I don't know, that bothers me. It does bother me. I mean, and it suggests that almost that something is not quite complete. Something is not done, not done right. And I would assume that Venus is void of course. Venus has made its last aspect before leaving the sign, and its last aspect was making an opposition to Saturn, and you can see that the moon is starting to make a sextile to Venus. But if you look at the ephemeris, you see that the moon makes the moon makes the is that right? The moon makes a sextile to Venus. I should be able to find it. Okay, it makes a sextile to Venus, and then but it makes a sextile to Venus after Venus has moved into Libra. So that really does mean that Venus is void of course. Venus is going nowhere. The planet of peace is going nowhere. Although you could argue that Venus isn't just a planet of peace, it's a planet of victory. And Trump is clearly making it out to be victory. This is a moment where he's telling Israel that it's victorious. And I think that the position of Venus just suggests to me that this is not necessarily, a done deal. And additionally, we've got Uranus on the ascendant. Is that bad? I don't think that's necessarily bad. I mean, Uranus on the ascendant represents something surprising, something just happening almost sort of out of the blue. I don't think you can look at Uranus on the ascendant and just say, oh, well, that is a bad signature. But I'm just not entirely convinced by this. Although I think that short term, it is great. I mean, short term, you've got the moon making a conjunction to Jupiter. I mean, moon-Jupiter conjunction, it's a great aspect to have. It is fortunate, it is lucky, it really does help things, move on. And it's having made the conjunction to Jupiter, it makes a trine to Saturn. So the chart certainly has some merit. And I do think short term, there is a feel-good factor with this horoscope, but the question is, how long will it last? Now, one way of, looking at this peace treaty is to think about, the previous lunation. And the previous lunation took place on October the 7th. So here is the full moon. So the full moon is, there was a full moon on October the 7th, 2025. Again, it says it's set for Cairo, but that's not Cairo. It is Cairo, but I've used the coordinates for Sharm el-Sheikh. So it is the Sharm el-Sheikh full moon, in spite of Cairo being mentioned on the chart. And it is an impressive chart. Well, it's impressive for a number of reasons. You've got a full moon on October the 7th. October the 7th, of course, being the second anniversary of Hamas's attack on Israel. So it's kind of fitting that full moon is right on the ascendant. It's an important point. It's important for the region. And if you if you set that chart for Gaza, again, it's not so different. I mean, Gaza and Sharm el Sheikh are not that far away from each other, and so you've got the full moon on the ascendant. So you could say that the full moon represents the culmination, where everything becomes clear. And maybe in this sense, the full moon is lucky because it suggests an ending. New moon, you could say, is more about a beginning, but the full moon, could be about some kind of ending. So it's not necessarily such a bad thing. Now, the man in the middle, the man who wants all the praise. I mean, ideally he wanted a Nobel Peace Prize, but I think I'm having doubts about the Nobel Peace Prize. I mean, it's kind of strange, isn't it, the Nobel Peace Prize? I mean, Obama got the Nobel Peace Prize just as he became president, and I don't think he really deserved a Nobel Peace Prize, and particularly as you see the stuff he did during his presidency in a global sense, what he did in terms of creating complete chaos in the Middle East in the wake of the Arab Spring, in Libya, Syria. It all happened on his patch. So I don't think he's particularly deserving of a Nobel Peace Prize. And so I don't know, I don't know whether it's such a big thing. But anyway, Trump wanted a Nobel Peace Prize, and maybe next time. And so here is Trump's chart. And with Trump, he does have Jupiter in Libra, and you could say that with Jupiter, Jupiter in Libra, he wants peace. He wants people to get on with each other. I mean, let's not be cynical about it. I mean, Jupiter, that's perhaps one way of looking at what Jupiter in Libra, is about. And he turned 79 at his last birthday, so 72. So that means from a profected perspective, if you take 1 year is one sign. So when he turned 78, that means that his profected ascendant was Aquarius. Then when he turned 79, his profected ascendant was Pisces. And so the ruler of Pisces is Jupiter, and he's got Jupiter in Libra. And so perhaps it's not surprising that he has this obsession with peace while he's in his 80th year. And as far as the transits he was experiencing, when he went to Sharm el Sheikh, it's Jupiter that stands out. I mean, Jupiter was a 2349 Cancer. And he has got his Saturn at 2314. He's got his Saturn. In fact, Donald Trump had an exact transit from Jupiter to his Saturn when he went to Sharm el Sheikh. And so that's pretty good, isn't it? I mean, Saturn represents your limitations. It also might represent him as an authority figure, being the president of the United States, and Jupiter moves on to his Saturn, so perhaps he gets the benefits of Saturn, and Jupiter is moving on to his Venus, so he's got Jupiter on his Venus, and so Jupiter on his Venus, I mean, it's it's just under 2 degrees apart, but it's still working, and I think maybe at some level we're seeing Trump's Venus-Saturn conjunction perhaps working on best form, wanting results, wanting something real. And so Jupiter is really helping him along. So that transit does seem to have worked very well for him, and I think that is perhaps the dominant transit. Though we shouldn't forget about true Black Moon Lilith. True Black Moon Lilith was at 2557 Libra, so he had true Black Moon Lilith, square his Venus, and I wonder, what that means. And I don't think one can say that that's necessarily a bad omen, but it's kind of just interesting that aspect is starting to manifest. Also notice that Venus is semi-sextile his ascendant. So this transiting Venus at 2948 just wasn't in Libra. Why wasn't it in Libra? And Venus is semi-sextile his ascendant. Maybe that's a good thing, having Venus semi-sextile ascendant. We think about semi-sextile as perhaps being a difficult aspect. I mean, at least I do. But semi-sextile ascendant it's Venus in Virgo. It's carefully managed. And he's trying his hardest to create the right impression, to create the right set of details. And, it's not necessarily easy. But that might be how it's working. So that's Donald Trump. I mean, there are other people who are going to be impacted by this event, and of course there's Hamas. It was Hamas who just over 2 years ago attacked Israel, and so as far as what this means for them. Hamas, I mean, I don't know what time Hamas was founded. I think it was founded sort of December the 14th, 1987. Sort of Hamas has Mars in Scorpio. So this all happened during Hamas's Mars return. And so the question is, what do they think about it? And with Mars conjunct Mars, that strikes me as being almost a call to battle. From Hamas's point of view, perspective, it probably isn't the end of the war, and maybe with their Mars return, this isn't what they wanted. They don't want peace necessarily, and it just might just be a ceasefire. You have a ceasefire, and it goes on for as long as possible, but in the end, it dissipates. Now, Hamas they do have their North Node at 28 Pisces. So Venus is on their South Node and Saturn is on their North Node. So there was a Saturn opposition, Venus-Saturn opposition at the time of Trump's meeting in Sharm el-Sheikh. And I think that is a real problem, even though that Venus-Saturn opposition is separating. The fact that Venus hadn't gone into Libra is very worrying. And I think that Venus-Saturn opposition is going to really weigh in on the peace process. And it's certainly weighing in on Hamas, the fact that it's affecting their nodal axis. And perhaps, the right thing for Hamas to do is the North Node in Pisces. Well, when we're talking about the right thing, show some discipline. That's right, show some discipline. It's all about the kind of image you present at the time, but what happens later. And then there is Israel. So here is the chart of Israel, and how is it affected by this meeting in Egypt? So Israel has its North Node at 14 Taurus. It therefore has its South Node at 14 Scorpio. Mars is on Israel's nodal axis. So it's kind of interesting. Hamas have their Mars return. Israel has Mars on its nodal axis. That doesn't strike me as necessarily being about peace. And perhaps it's about thinking about the next step. Mars on their South Node perhaps indicates, it should indicate that perhaps a violence should be something from the past. I mean, if you see the South Node as the past, the war is the past. The war should be over, And additionally, Jupiter is pretty close to Israel's midheaven, and the moon is coming up to Jupiter, to Israel's midheaven. So it does seem that Israel can leverage this peace process to suit its own purposes. And additionally, the sun is starting to move onto Israel's ascendant. So I think that Israel, perhaps in one way or another, can benefit from the peace process, at least from what Trump has done. And as far as Hamas is concerned, I just am concerned about the fact that it is their Mars return, but it's taking place at the time of their Mars return. So, maybe they're, thinking about the future. Mars in Scorpio. I mean, you can imagine Hamas having Mars in Scorpio. I mean, that really does fit Hamas. And so it's a new chapter for Hamas. But I'm not convinced that it's a new chapter, of peace. But we need to look at this more. I mean, I've just got one chart that I'm really focusing on, that 725 chart when Trump was in Sharm el Sheikh, and I'm just, again, I think it's really disturbing that Venus hadn't gone into Libra. So close to going into Libra. If it had happened, just a few hours later, it would have been fine. But no, Trump couldn't wait. He wanted to get the whole thing sealed. So those are a few thoughts on Gaza. I'm afraid I was a bit sort of vague, but I hope you found it of some interest. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.